everybody. Mark Schaftlein with you, and this is the Schaftlein Report. It's Tuesday's edition, 1 week prior to the midterm elections. Drew, welcome back to the show. Happy to have your analysis today. Let's talk about where we are, T-minus 7 days.
Yeah, the countdown's here. I mean, it's hard to believe the year's almost over, but also these long-awaited, anticipated elections have come. I mean, I feel like we have been talking about these since Biden was inaugurated because, this was the only political salvation and hope we had to save the country. So here we are up against it.
Yeah, it really is. And what's amazing to me, and you and I talked about this a little bit prior to the show, Election Day is a week from today, but we've really had election season for the past, let's call it 3 weeks. 21 million Americans have already voted. There's some pros and cons to that, Drew. Why don't you sort of, break them down, the good news and then the not so good news?
Yeah, I mean, look, the good news is simply that you have high participation in the election process, right? People actually taking part in their most sacred, duty, responsibility, and freedom that they have in America that makes us so unique. But, I've got to say, I mean, you could get the same results in a more honest way that was, more in line and had more integrity, I'd say. The issue with this early voting stuff, I mean, great. I'm glad people voted, but it robs both the candidate and the voter of actually having the same access to information. I mean, I liken it kind of to like if a teacher was going to, or a professor was going to administer an exam to a class of students, and even if, half the class were permitted to take the exam, let's say 3 weeks before the course ended, before all the lessons were in, they would be at a disadvantage in terms of going into that exam. So in that example, though, of course, that's fine, right? If everyone's test scores were their own, you're just kind of screwing yourself. If you want to take the exam 3 weeks before the semester's over and you don't have all the lectures and all that sort of stuff in, fine. And the other half is able to perform better. But the issue with elections is that it affects all of us, right? So it's almost like we get an average score, we're going to get this candidate. So I don't like it because it robs the candidate from having the exact same amount of time here, right, to make their case to the American people. And it robs us of certain information. It's not transparent. And the perfect example of that in action, this is just pragmatic. It makes the most sense. In the Fetterman case, look, they hid him away. They tried to hide, the severity of his impairment based on his stroke. And finally, they had the debate. But 500,000 people in Pennsylvania had already cast their votes before that debate, before those two candidates were actually able to make their case to the American people to come up, head to head with one another and actually debate. And there were people after that debate, Mark, that I saw interviewed, and they said, hey, I was leaning towards voting for Fetterman, but after having watched that debate, I can't vote for Fetterman anymore. I'm going to vote for Oz. And that's very significant, right? So, but, if you voted for Fetterman and you watched the debate and you wanted to change your mind, well, you voted early.
I'm hopeful that in the example you talked about, that the early voting was really what I would call on a partisan type basis. In other words, Democrats who knew they were going to vote for Fetterman come hell or high water, they did their vote. Republicans for Oz, same thing. Now, more Democrats voted in Pennsylvania in early voting. Republicans are catching up. But if that was the case, it may not be as significant. But again, in a tight race like Fetterman Oz, a couple thousand votes could end up making a difference. So, we're never going to know the answer to that, but it's certainly independent voters and people who had not made up their mind. Hopefully they had not. Well, obviously, if you hadn't made up your mind, you haven't voted. But I'm in your camp there. I'd like to see it tighten up a little bit. Maybe not where you could vote a month in advance. Maybe you shorten it to a couple of weeks. I don't know. But I'm optimistic based on that performance that Oz did and that Fetterman has just been panned by everyone except the far left. I hope it's enough to push Oz over the finish line because Fetterman would be a disgrace for the people of Pennsylvania.
Yeah. I mean, he's, I've referred to Fetterman as the Joe Biden of the midterms. And, I really don't mean that in any kind of cruel way, especially after watching that debate. I mean, honestly, I can't even make fun of him. I mean, the Fetterman demonstrated that he needs to be, and I'm serious, he needs to be in rehabilitation. He needs to be focused on his own well-being and improvement, not trying to vie for a seat in the Senate. But, he didn't drop out. The Democrats tried to hide it. I mean, they pushed him forward, and they're trying to use that as some kind of guilt trip to get votes for him, saying, "Oh, look, he was so brave and transparent. He even admitted that he couldn't speak, he couldn't think, he couldn't formulate thoughts." Just to expect that. It's like, look, we're talking about the Senate here. We're talking about elected representatives. I'm sorry, that's disqualifying. It's not a I know something to be proud of.
Right.
That you're struggling.
Yeah, and he also his campaign will not disclose what his own doctor's medical report shows. I mean, if I'm in Pennsylvania, forget the fact that we're Republicans. If you're an independent voter in Pennsylvania, how could you possibly vote for a man who deliberately deceived you and disguised his medical records? If he'll do that, he would do anything. So I'm really hopeful Oz can pull this out, because the people of Pennsylvania, forget if you're Republican, Democrat, or independent, you deserve a quality representation. And John Fetterman basically is a fraud. So, and that's putting it kindly based upon what his campaign has done. Maybe I'm being too harsh, maybe I'm being too partisan, but I really think the people of Pennsylvania have been defrauded by his candidacy and the exposure to what he's really trying to perpetrate, not only on Pennsylvanians, but on the American public. It's horrific. So maybe it's harsh, but that's how I feel. Let me move on to Arizona. We had an interesting development last night. I don't know how significant it's going to be, Drew, because the Libertarian candidate dropped out of the race and endorsed Blake Masters. Now, he was only polling at 1%. But again, in a race as close as this one, the 1%, it could make a difference.
Yeah, it could be really substantial. I mean, it's definitely of benefit. I mean, there's no downside to what just took place. I mean, it's also going to give him additional momentum. I mean, the Libertarian Party today is kind of odd, Mark. I mean, they really aren't. I used to think of Libertarians as being more in line with conservatives, they didn't want to be in the Republican Party, but, ultimately they would go Republican over Democrat. But Libertarians are kind of wonky, actually. And a lot of them, have a lot of Democrat ideas, oddly enough. But nonetheless, removing him from the equation, obviously there aren't going to be votes taken away from either candidate. But in particular, you would still think they would be taken away from the Republican there. So, yeah, I mean, that's huge. And look, that also shows how significant the situation in America is. If somebody's running for office, they're a Libertarian, they know they're not going to win, typically they still wouldn't drop out. They wouldn't try to help anybody else. They'd still stay in there and represent the Libertarian Party or whatever it is. But this guy's saying, hey, look, the country's in such dire shape. I actually really rally behind this person, Blake Masters,
Yes.
Yeah. And, I really believe his message. I mean, I saw what he said. I mean, it was really passionate. It was really moving. I mean, how he just loves this country and he believes that Masters can get the job done. So I think this is huge momentum wise.
Yeah, no question about it. Jim McLaughlin, a Republican pollster now, he's got Kelly still +2, but he's got Kari Lake up by, 10, 11 points. And he said the key in Arizona is the Hispanic vote is shifting big time to the GOP. We have a situation where we could possibly see Kari Lake help pull Blake Masters over the finish line. She's certainly doing everything she can to help him. And, here's something I want to point out to our viewers and listeners. Don't take polling numbers as gospel of who's going to win. Polling numbers are a snapshot in time that gives you an indication of where a trend is if one is developed right now. It does not mean that just because Republicans are up that they're going to win. That's why it's critical that everybody continue to vote. What it does show, though, if you loop all of the cumulative amount of data, it does show people of all stripes of voters trending towards Republicans. And we're going to get into that here in a little bit. On the Libertarian piece, Drew, one area that could maybe avoid a runoff if the Libertarian dropped off would be Georgia. Because in Georgia, the Libertarian Party is getting about 3 to 4% of the vote. That's huge. And more than likely, I mean, I've seen polls showing Herschel's up 3-5 by reputable pollsters. I've seen others showing he's up 1-2, but he's clearly got a lead. I don't think the lead's going to be enough to hit the 50% mark. What are your thoughts there on Georgia right now?
Yeah, Georgia's tough. I mean, I'm hopeful that it doesn't go down to a runoff. That state, what a wonk, whatever, what wonky rules I would say, it's just really not in the best interest
No.
of the voters there. This happens too often, but look, I guess that's where I'm at. I'm just hopeful that it's not going to get to that situation. We don't have a runoff situation again. But gosh, wouldn't it be nice if that Libertarian candidate dropped out of there and did the same thing?
It would. Yeah. I mean, right now, again, Scott Rasmussen, again, a very, very reputable pollster. He's called presidential elections, senatorial elections within a point, going back 20 years. He's got Herschel up 5 points right now. The Real Clear Politics average has him +2. And this comes despite the fact Walker's been outspent 4-1 by Raphael Warnock. I mean, Drew, Democrats have poured money into this race. I'll give you my impression why. I think if Herschel Walker wins this race, it absolutely obliterates and crushes the Democratic narrative that almost dictate African-American men have to vote for the Democratic candidate. Herschel Walker has proven, no, that is absolutely not true. And he's withstood withering criticism. I mean, on his personal life, I mean, people have stood up and said, you know what? We're going to vote for this man. And I really believe, Drew, sometimes you have these elections where it's a vote against the other guy. I don't think that's the case here. I think people genuinely want to get out and vote for Herschel Walker because you may not always agree with what he says, but what he says he means, and there's no ambiguity in what Herschel Walker stands for.
Yeah, I think that's true of all these races. As a matter of fact, this is not an election, against, most of these candidates. I mean, I think that, yes, while it's a referendum on the Democrats' agenda and the Biden administration's agenda and all their policies that have been so dangerous. I mean, people are voting for change.
Yes.
They're voting to take the country in a different direction. They're voting for another alternative because they understand that the current path we're on is not sustainable. It's harmful and it's just going to get worse. So, nobody, and especially with these Senate races, I mean, some of the states, obviously, in Kari Lake's case, I mean, she's become really a superstar. I mean, people will talk about her being a potential presidential candidate for Republicans one day if this keeps up. And there are already murmurs of that. So that's star power. But, I don't think the Georgia race, I mean, that's not star power. I mean, it's not the same situation as Kari Lake. I mean, Warnock is not some superstar in the Democrat Party, certainly. So yeah, I mean, and you're right. You've brought this up before, and I'm glad you do. But they fear black ascendancy in the Republican Party. I mean, when Winsome Sears won the lieutenant governorship in Virginia, I mean, they all but ignored it. I mean, black lieutenant governor. I mean, that would be a big deal if it were a Democrat. Now, we don't look at the world that way. We look at merits and values. But they do fear this. And look, they understand right now that they are hemorrhaging support from the black constituency. So when you take into consideration the quote unquote Hispanic vote, which is just flipping, and just they're flocking to the Republican Party. And then when you consider the black constituency, which the Democrats have understood since, the 1940s and 50s, that they needed that vote to win.
Yep. And what's really going to be a shock, I think, for Democrats, I think African-American men will constitute 20% of support for Republicans, maybe slightly higher, but that's how I really feel it's going to be. Let me shift over next door, to Nevada. We talked a little bit about Arizona. We shifted back east to Georgia. Nevada, very close rates. Robert Cahaley's group, Trafalger, they've got Laxalt up 4. The Real Clear Politics average has him up about 1.5. How do you see Nevada right now? You got the Culinary Union, solidly Democrat. I have no idea why they religiously just pump Democrat into their heads. and the Democrats don't do anything for him. But it does look like Laxalt has a shot to flip this seat, from blue to red.
Yeah, well, and you can see um, the belief in that possibility growing on the Republican side. I mean, more and more people are coming out. They're getting involved in that state. They're coming out in support of Laxalt, people who were hesitant before. So, I mean, there's every sign that that's a possibility as well. I mean, nothing's impossible, frankly, in this particular midterm cycle. I mean, that's one of those races where I hope that we're looking at it and talking about it today. And the next time we talk about this after results are in, I hope Laxalt wins by, a landslide. I mean, the only ads I've seen attacking Laxalt are, from the Democrats. I mean, on TV, every time I turn it on, it's Laxalt is radical because he's pro-life. I mean, that's what they have. That's
Pretty
it.
lame, pretty lame there. Talk about a shocker. Did you ever think we'd be sitting here 1 week outside election and see Lee Zeldon up on Kathy Hochul in New York? I mean, Lee Zeldon's up just under a point, again, according to Robert Cahaly, the Trafalger poll. Drew, I went inside those numbers on that poll. 55% of the people polled were Democrats in New York, which seems about right. The number of Republicans polled 32. So, I mean, this isn't some media outlet just trying to massage numbers for the sake of getting. This is Trafalgar saying, hey, Lee Zeldon can win this race against Kathy Hochul. And what's the issue Drew he's focused on more than anything? Crime. I mean, to me, that would be an earthquake if that happened in New York State.
Yeah, it's not supposed to be possible. I mean, gosh, I mean, I think that it's kind of lost. It's lost on me even, when I sit here and I just think about the fact that a Republican could win the governorship in New York. I mean, when was the last time that happened?
George Pataki had 3 straight terms back before New York turned deep blue.
Yeah.
That's actually last time. People forget that it's not that long ago that they elected a Republican governor 3 straight times. I mean, yeah. But anyhow, in the current environment, no. I mean, you didn't expect something like that. But that just goes to show you, Drew, when Democrats try to lie about the crime issue and say, oh, no, and Hochul gets on and says, we're a blue state and we're much safer, people just look and they go, no, you're not. Here's what I found really interesting, too. The media has attacked Republicans for trying to create a crime issue. But guess what? 82% of Black Americans who are going to vote Democrats, these are Black Democrats, they're concerned about crime. Only a third of white Democrats think crime is a major problem. Well, Drew, that's real easy to understand. More crime affects African Americans than affects white Americans. That to me is a logical understanding. And it just seems to me the Democratic Party just doesn't get it, that crime is affecting everybody, regardless of race, religion, creed, doesn't seem to matter. It's everywhere.
Yeah, well, as you were talking, I was just looking up. I had a note here about a story I looked at, and, it's from the Washington Examiner. And, if you talk about, defunding the police, for example, right, which the Democrats have long supported, when you think about that issue, I mean, what percentage would you think of Black supported defunding the police? I mean, the way the Democrats talk, you'd think it'd be nearly 100%, but it's just 17% of Black voters.
Right.
17% of Black voters. So, the Democrats are really delusional. I mean, it's working to our advantage right now. But, the issue with the Democrats is, I mean, they really are so desperate. They're so unwilling to change course. They're so devoted to this radical ideology to fundamentally transform America into, a slave nation, essentially, ruling over all of us. That they don't have any restraint. They're kind of like backed into a wall right now, like a wild animal, and they're going crazy right now. I mean, we see that all over the place, with whatever, we'll get into it later, but the way they're presenting this Paul Pelosi story, if you get into, this newest thing by Joe Biden, right? He's attacking the oil industry in America again. He's threatened to eliminate them, and now he's trying to make them a scapegoat, and he's threatening to tax them because they're making too many profits if they don't increase production. I mean, I mean, these people, this is the frightening thing. So, I mean, I would just say, look, we got to do what we have to do here in the midterms and win, but don't expect these problems to go away. The
Right.
Democrat Party is just going to get worse and worse if that happens.
Yeah. Well, let me share a couple things with you here. Right now, Republican enthusiasm is up 10% over Democrats. That's a really good number for Republicans because the Republican voters are, basically let me walk over glass and nails to get to the voting booth. We'll see if it pans out. Generic ballot, Republicans are still +2. Now, normally when you're +2 and you're a Republican, that could translate into 30 to 40 House seats and a win in the Senate. We'll see. I actually thought the generic ballot might be a little higher, but it is what it is. It's +2 right now. But I'm going to go back to this crime thing real quick here. I think Republican attacks on Democrats, which you mentioned, on this crime issue, I think it's having a devastating effect because people are out there, they see the gas prices every day. They feel the food prices when they go to the store. They can touch and see it. But the crime affects everybody, and it affects everybody knows someone's been a victim of this. It doesn't matter whether you're in a rural area, in a city, it's everywhere. And then these Democratic prosecutors, Drew, that are letting these convicts out, no bail, changing bail laws. I mean, it's just, I think it's caught up with them. And I think it's going to be taken out on them come election week, I guess we should call it now.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's one thing. I mean, even though you feel certain economic pain and so on and so forth. I mean, look, I mean, let's think about some of the people that depend upon welfare even, right? I mean, that's one of the means by which the Democrat Party, sinks its fangs into people and keeps them voting Democrat for a long time. Those people don't want crime either. So I guess the point is, crime really is the most significant issue to everyone.
Yeah.
Obviously economics is huge too, but I would argue that maybe crime is even worse or even better for Republicans in terms of running on because like we were pointing out, 17% of black voters support defund the police. So, even in these reliably Democrat strongholds where, maybe the economic situation isn't as important to some people because look, I mean, to be honest, if you're collecting a welfare check, you're not looking at things the same way as a lot of people who are just seeing, their income eaten away and so on and so forth. But this crime is really, really, I think perhaps, I mean, it's definitely neck and neck with the economy.
Yeah, it's of all the issues, it's ranked number 2 right now. If you lump the economy, inflation as issue 1, crime's number 2, and you're seeing it in the numbers. And look what we had last night, Halloween night, mass shooting in Chicago, 14 people injured. Thank God nobody got killed in that. But I mean, it just you see it everywhere. And here's something, Drew, that I think is going to be the big thing that is really going to fry the Democrats. White suburban women. Now they go to the grocery, they buy gas, and they want to see their kids raised in a safe environment. It doesn't matter whether you're white, black, Asian, Hispanic, doesn't matter. That's 20% of the electorate, white suburban women. Drew, there's been a 26-point shift from the last election to now. The GOP's up 15 points among these white suburban women. I got news for you. If that holds, you are going to see a red wave on election night.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things they touted, for their success in the past, right? I mean, they compete for these white suburban moms, right? I mean, you have all these different constituencies, of course, that can dictate and change and really affect the outcome of elections. But that's one of the important groups as well. And you're right. I mean, look, we saw that in Virginia.
Yeah.
When Glenn Youngkin won and Winsome Sears, and they swept elections there in Virginia. I mean, look. That was, I think, the early sign that the midterms were going to go this way. And what was the issue there? Well, it was outraged parents. It was suburban moms, for example, and others who were outraged at these public schools in Loudoun County and the rest of Virginia, who were, teaching critical race theory, gender theory, a father's, a family their daughter was raped in a gender fluid bathroom by a boy in a skirt, and then the school denied that it ever happened. I mean, this is what drove it. It's about parental rights. It's about taking back your children. So yeah, it's huge.
Yeah, and I want to talk one more thing about a campaign, and we'll get on some other issues here. I saw a little note that Joe Biden is flying down to South Florida today. He's going to campaign in Hallandale, Florida. That's where Gulfstream Racetrack is. It's South Broward County. Heavy Democratic area. He's going to do a fundraiser there. He's going to campaign for Charlie Crist and Val Demings. My take on this is someone in the White House said, God, this just looks bad. We can't have Biden not campaigning at all other than Pennsylvania and voting in Delaware and having Obama everywhere. This just looks, optics of this are terrible. So what do? They send him down to South Florida. Ron DeSantis is up anywhere from 11 to 14 points. He's likely to get a double-digit win. Marco Rubio is up somewhere around 8 to 10 points. He's likely to get a high single-digit win. It's almost like Biden's a sacrificial lamb. Democrats have no hope of winning those Florida races, and yet they ship Biden down there. He probably doesn't even know they can't even win those races. He was told, hey, you got to get out. Let's send you to South Florida. It's safe ground. Has my theory held in credibility, Drew?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't make sense. I mean, look, the president can't afford to just sit around and do nothing, right? I mean,
right.
The midterms are coming, so they've got to ship him out there and give him a task. It's like
something.
Yeah. So this is it. It's kind of like okay, Kamala, you're the border czar. You never have to visit the border. Don't do anything, but I don't know, go out and give a speech here and there. I mean, this is our figurehead president here. So I mean, it is laughable. It's just we're so numb and used to this now. But this guy's he doesn't make any decisions for himself. He's just okay, where am I going today? Okay, Joe, you're headed down to South Florida, and he gets on the plane and goes, and no question, no pushback. Well, wait a minute, this guy. Why am I going to South Florida? This is going to look bad on me, right? Because, there's no chance any Democrat wins down there. Nah, just go, Joe. Just go. Take your oatmeal and go.
Right, get a media appearance. All right, I'm going to stop on politics for just a second, but I'm going to talk about a few issues here. Drew, a bunch of Venezuelans attacked Border Patrol agents in El Paso today. They had the Venezuelan flag. It was like the Border Patrol had to use crowd control measures to push them back across the Rio Grande River. This cannot be good for Democrats, seeing a big wave of Venezuelans coming across in El Paso. Again, the esteemed vice president, she came to El Paso, didn't even visit the border. I mean, this is more of the same. It's just being more out in the open for the press, and you hardly hear anything from the press about it.
Well, no, of course not. But I am actually surprised because, last time the Border Patrol were caught doing their jobs, they were put on desk duty, and Mayorkas went out and lied and said that they were whipping the Haitians. So I'm waiting for them to come out and issue a statement condemning these Border Patrol agents, for defending themselves.
Yeah. Well, a couple other things here, a couple of just bullet points that I want to get to a closing piece, and that closing piece we're going to talk a little bit about the Paul Pelosi politicization. But a couple things here for you. People are still ticked off over gas prices. Only 1 in 3 Americans support those energy policies. They know it's bad. But let me talk about 2 things here that are really sort of getting people's ire up a little bit. John Roberts temporarily has blocked this release of Trump's tax returns. I think Roberts probably did the right thing. He doesn't want to see a major issue like that popping up a week before the election. I don't know if that had anything to do with it or it's steeped in law. I can't comment, but I am glad he did that on a temporary basis. And then, Drew, the liberals and the far left-wing radicals are going crazy over Elon Musk's takeover. He's fired all the top executives, totally replaced the board. Now he's limiting censorship tools for the employees to access. I mean, give me your impressions, first of all, about Musk, and then about, the Roberts case with Trump.
Yeah, well, I mean, everything's so exaggerated in terms of Twitter. I mean, yes, he's made some changes to Twitter, and we want him to make those changes. We want him to restore Twitter to a free speech platform that doesn't discriminate or censor, certain specific individuals just because it's not, a Democrat point of view. It's not the established narrative. But look, I mean, he's been in there for what, a week now. Not that much has really changed. And Twitter does not represent, the entire,
Right.
a majority of Americans are not on Twitter. But it's just the idea that the Democrats could lose any tool of censorship. It just because they want a monopoly on power. I mean, if you look at the Democratic Party, Mark, I mean, we have these antitrust laws, right, that are supposed to prevent, companies from, essentially colluding and conspiring to eliminate competition, for their own success. And, they do this vertical integration. I mean, that's what we have with the Democratic Party, right? They want to be in charge of every single level of the supply chain, right? Whether it's the information coming out, children, indoctrinating them to become young voters at an early age. They want to control the voting process and those laws. I mean, it's just it's outrageous. But look, I love what Elon's doing. I mean, I think it's so fun to watch the left lose their minds. It's at least gives me joy.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Listen, we got a couple minutes left. You're close to the Bay Area, relatively close to the Bay Area compared to the other 95% of the country. This Paul Pelosi attack, why, Drew? I'm just thinking out loud here, again, no one wants to see any American attack. I didn't wish that upon anybody. But boy, the media is giving it a completely different reaction than, say, when Rand Paul was attacked and broke 6 ribs. Lee Zeldon was almost the victim of crime in his own house. Steve Scalise almost was killed on a baseball field. I mean, there were leftists that celebrated when Rand Paul was attacked by his neighbor at his house. And yet a lot of things are popping up on this Paul Pelosi attack. You've been doing what I call a deep dive into this. Share with our audience what you've learned and what's happening with the media relative to this case.
Yeah, well, the first troubling thing, of course, is that, look, the media rushed to turn this into a politically advantageous story for them. Now, they are not allowing us to ask reasonable questions that any journalist would actually be asked. They are determined to tell one specific narrative. And a lot of this doesn't even make sense. I mean, there's holes in the story. I'll give you a few examples. What this story really shows me is how corrupt the FBI has actually become as well. The individual, I forget her name right now, but the one who wrote the affidavit up, for this attack on Paul Pelosi, she's been involved in many, many cases in the past that are going after specifically right-wing extremists. And so she signed off on many of those affidavits. So the FBI is making a concerted effort to find and even manufacture instances of far right-wing, extremism and violence to push this narrative, to further their cause. And they want to censor us. They want to come after us. They want to do all manner of things in terms of eliminating our freedom in the name of, protecting the Americans out there. But look, this individual is said to have broken into the home. Now, the initial reports from this were that, look, the police chief himself in San Francisco gave a press conference and said a third person opened the door, where a cop then saw Paul Pelosi and, this deranged lunatic, going back and forth fighting, with over a hammer. And then the media immediately went to erase this third person from existence. That's a pretty big error to make, right? To go from, because the narrative now is that Paul Pelosi himself opened the door. Yeah. So you look at the time of all this, it doesn't make sense. From the time he makes the phone call to the time the police show up, it's about 8 minutes. Okay. And so what happened in those 8 minutes? Paul Pelosi and this lunatic were literally, the way they tell the story now, standing right in front of the front door. And there's a knock on the door while they're squabbling. Paul Pelosi hasn't been attacked yet. And he opens the door for the cop. And that's when the hammer's, won over by this other guy and he's hitting the head with it. And furthermore, there's one witness in this affidavit, one witness who attests, this is a private security person for another wealthy household in the neighborhood. And this person asserts that he heard a banging like on a door or a window. Now, if you take a hammer I kid you not. This is how deep I went, Mark. I watched videos of people trying to break glass. So if you take a hammer to glass that's thick and heavy, like that glass that you can see that was broken at the Pelosi home, it sounds like you're just banging on a window. So my question is, this person says he heard banging, and then 2 minutes later, he heard the police sirens. Okay? It doesn't add up even in terms of the time frame we're talking about here, right? Because from the time he made the phone call, it took 8 minutes for police to get there. Now, we don't know how long the individual was actually in the house.
Yeah, I heard some stories that I don't know if it's true because I haven't done a deep dive, but something about how Paul Pelosi asked to use the bathroom, went into the bathroom, dialed 911. I mean, if you're dealing with a raging lunatic, which apparently, from what I've heard, this guy was some illegal immigrant.
Yep, from Canada.
Homeless guy that's part of a nudist colony, and he was mentally ill. I mean, that doesn't sound like someone that can be reasoned with. I don't know, Drew. There's so many things about this that just I don't know.
Look. There's a cover up absolutely happening now. Look, I'm not denying that the guy was there. I'm not denying that he got hit in the head with a hammer. But everything else is suspect. Is my point.
Yeah.
We're learning all this motive right after the FBI talked to him, and he just happens to say, this litany, this dream that the left would like him to say. Right. And I'm sorry, that we're not allowed to ask about this. Is it not significant, Mark? If there are 3 people in the house or 2 people, does that not make a difference? Who's the third person? How is it possible that the police chief first says a third person? How do you misinterpret from the cop who's telling you what happened? I mean, it's either Paul Pelosi opened the door or someone else opened the door and you see Paul Pelosi and him squabbling. That's a pretty significant thing if you're a cop to mess up. Yeah. And so now we're they're adamant this didn't happen. There was no third person. But, they're screwing up, and we're not allowed to ask any questions because the narrative is Donald Trump's responsible for this. Well, he incited this act of violence. That's the narrative.
That's never going to fly among the overwhelming majority of Americans. And the interesting thing about this, think about this. We've talked a lot about crime, Drew. Think about this. The crime is so bad in this country. The Speaker of the House couldn't even have her own property protected. Lee Zeldon, there was an attack made right outside his house. He could be the next governor of New York. So a potential governor of New York, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, if they're not safe, how is the average American going to feel safe? I don't know. If there's something to this beyond, obviously the injuries suffered by Paul Pelosi, if there's anything nefarious with the reporting, I wouldn't put it past the media to do anything, given the history of Jesse Smollett and what happened in Atlanta. And I mean, I could go through a laundry list the length of my arm about media jumping to conclusions before we know all the facts. But Drew, I think this reinforces the notion that crime under the Democrats is out of control. And if someone concocted something on this for a political reason, they'd have their head examined.
Yeah. Well, you bring up a great point, and that's something I might do on my podcast later, which will be fun. Is what are the real alternate headlines we should be looking at, right? Like an illegal immigrant attacks Paul Pelosi. That would be one headline, right? Somebody who's here illegally. A family worth $250 billion, has a break-in, or, illegal immigrant gets past a private security guard. I mean,
it's crazy. And I mean, to make it worse, an illegal immigrant who is part of a nudist colony who, you can't make this stuff up. I mean, it's just, it boggles the mind. I mean, but look, there's a lot of crazies in the Bay Area. We know that. Yeah. And there's a lot of crazies all across the country. So how you reason with these people, I don't know. All right, we have 30 seconds left. You're going to be back either next Tuesday or Wednesday. We're either going to talk about it on election day or the day after. Give me your prediction, House and Senate here. We got 30 seconds.
Look, we're going to take back the House massively. We're also going to take back the Senate. I don't think the Warnock race is going to go to runoff. I think Herschel Walker is going to pull that one out. I have faith in it. I have faith in Blake Masters here. I'm really excited. I hope Kari Lake wins, by double digits. Yep. But of course, as we have to say, this is a caveat. As long as we vote, right? As long as we vote, we have to vote. And that I do believe that will be the, well, you know, here's one thing too, though, Mark. Look, places like Pennsylvania, we're going to see the same crap happening where they're going to make us wait 2 weeks to get a result. I kid you not. That's what we're going to have happen too. And it's going to be infuriating.
Yeah, I think you may be right about that. My prediction this week, a week out, is that we're going to win about 20 to 25 House seats. And I think we're going to be +1, maybe under a best case scenario, +2 in the Senate. However, if that red wave breaks, you could win New Hampshire, you could win Washington State. If that happens, it's Katie bar the door. And if Lee Zeldon wins, we're talking about maybe 55 Senate seats. Drew, I look forward to seeing you next week, either on election day or the day after. And this is really exciting stuff. We've been talking about this for 2 years now, and it's finally come to fruition to save the country. Thanks for being my guest today. Your insights are very, very valuable. I look forward to seeing you sometime next week.
Hey, me too. Thanks, Mark.
Okay, folks, that's it for today. We'll be back tomorrow and Thursday, pre-election coverage. We'll cut through the propaganda, tell you straight. Look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Thanks for viewing and listening today. See you on Wednesday.